Welcome to St. Louis in Tune, and thank you for joining us for fresh perspectives on issues and events with experts, community leaders, and everyday people who drive change and make an impact that shapes our society and world. I'm your host, Arnold Stricker, along with co-host Mark Langston. Mark, it's been a while. You've been on assignment.
I was, yes. I was on assignment at the auto repair shop.
Oh.
I guess. I know. Why is it that when it's, I don't know, my radiator went out? That's the worst thing ever.
That is not very good.
Yeah, it's scary, too. I know.
But you weren't driving.
Actually, I was.
Oh,
Oh, my, yes. But, yeah, it's good to be back. It's good to be back and see your smiling face.
Yes. It's good to be seen.
Yes.
It's always good to be seen. We've got a wonderful show today. We're going to talk about baseball and baseball in St. Louis and some of those individuals from the St. Louis area who had an impact in Major League Baseball. But first of all, we're going to return to civility.
About time.
And get our return to civility quote for the day. It's a great day to do this, except it might be getting a little warm. When you're bike riding and want to pass someone, give advance notice. For example, say, on your left, and thank people when they move over.
Isn't that nice?
It's the common courtesy. I have a bell now on my bike. I'd like to get a truck horn.
I was going to say, you need a train horn.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, those are the loudest horns.
I think my little thing that I have, especially riding in Forest Park, is some people like to walk and run on the bike path rather than on the walk path.
Oh, okay.
So it's bike and hike. Bike this way, hike this way. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe all the bikers should get on the walk path.
No,
that's
all right. Yeah,
but it's like there's a stripe on there.
Good for the gander.
I get on the walk path.
I don't understand. Why is it so hard? I don't know why it's so difficult.
I don't understand that.
Like, can we all work together?
That's correct. So when you're bike riding and want to pass someone, give advance notice. On your left is usually the common preferred way to do that. Recently, there's been some deaths of some famous baseball figures here in the metropolitan St. Louis area. And in studio to talk about those and some other things that he's been working on that he's just like the master of is Ed Whitey. Ed's an award-winning author, film producer, sports historian. He is St. Louis in Tune's sports historian. And his writings have been recognized by the Sports Collectors Digest, the best book published on baseball. You have to get it, folks. He's also done some books selected by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch as one of the top 25 books of 2020. His films have received Emmy nominations and a win. He was selected for prestigious annual film festivals at the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Ed, welcome back to St. Louis in Tune.
Glad to always be back here.
Yeah,
thanks for the little write-up there.
I think this is like the fourth time you've been here, and that's great.
It's about 4 or 5, who knows?
You've got a great thing on the Browns here. Yeah. And, folks, I want to give kudos to Ed Whitey because if it wasn't for Ed Whitey, no one would know about the St. Louis Browns in our generation.
Right.
So thank you.
We don't get any help from the Orioles in Baltimore.
No.
Yeah, what's with that?
Other cities, there is no fan club like ours for the Brooklyn Dodgers, New York Giants, Boston Braves, Philadelphia Athletics.
Wow.
Yet we hold events, and we have 400-plus people come annually to our luncheon. Mm-hmm. We'll have in August our Browns Night at the Grizzlies, where thousands show up. We have the special limited edition bobblehead that unbelievable what some of those are going for on eBay because we reject them over and over. Because I got to have the right dimple in George Sisler's chin. Or that's too round of Seavers. I remember when I did the Roy Seavers, I rejected it a couple times because the color is also important. Mm-hmm. But Roy Seavers' daughter, first time I showed her, she started crying. That's my daddy.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that just tells you how much it means. Yeah. I had Satchel Paige's daughter heavily involved in his. It is. Keep the Browns' memory alive because St. Louis is the best baseball town in America, and it's just not about the Cardinals. It's our history, the history with the Browns, the history with the Negro League Giants and Stars. We have so much. So if you build it, they will come. Yeah. Apropos from the film, if you talk baseball, people will listen and come.
So can I say I went to the luncheon, I think last year. I was able to grab a ticket.
Yeah.
And so you say it's in
September 24th. It'll be at the Missouri Athletic Club. You can go to STLBrowns.com com. That's our website, and you can pick up the information.
What a great time. I had a wonderful time. A lot of older folks there, but there's a lot of young folks.
Yeah, there are a lot of older folks, and I bring in big names. Don Larson was a regular there.
Just going to say that, yeah.
Last year we had Rick Dempsey, 1983, MVP. He's one of the best speakers on baseball around now.
Right.
We had Jerry Royce before. We've had Tommy Lasorda, Whitey Herzog. We get some big names, and they do all call up wanting to get in line to come.
That's great.
Costas pops in. Last year Bob called and said, hey, think I can come? So, yeah. And at Whitey's funeral, he and I were talking about, I think I'm going to try to be there. I want to be there.
And there's a lot of audio or visual stuff that they do as well.
And this year we're going to have Mike Veck. He was supposed to be here the year of the virus, and he couldn't make it because of the pandemic. His dad was Bill and owned the Browns, and he had a long career with his dad in baseball, especially up in Chicago. If you remember the immortal Disco Demolition Night, when they blew up all the records. And then on top of it, we're going to have the umpire, Dave Phillips, who's from St. Louis as well, who was the crew chief that day. The Disco Demolition happened between games of a doubleheader. He forfeited the second game against the White Sox because the field was just all blown up and burnt and destroyed. We'll have a little fun with that. Plus, Dave has so many. He holds the record for the most games of kicking out Earl Weaver, and he's got stories. So it's a day of just sit back, listen to great baseball stories.
It really is. If you like baseball, this is an event you probably didn't even think about, not on your radar, whatever, but it was a surprisingly enjoyable event, and I am so glad I went.
One last thing on that, where you said the thing about older people, they do tend, because they still remember the Browns.
Yes.
Even though they last played 71 seasons ago, there were a lot that will still show me. I was at the 44 World Series. You want to see my ticket stub or a memory? But there's a lot of young people that come because their parents, their grandparents were such diehard Browns fans that they talked about or wore always a Browns hat.
Right.
They want to learn. And ever since we came out with the movies, the books, we have just brought forth this new level of publicity. And when I go up to Brooklyn or New York and doing research on the Giants or the Dodgers, and it's amazing. And I get calls throughout the year, every year. So how do you do this still? How do people have an interest? One, we're the best baseball town in America.
Yes.
Two, there was a loyalty to the team that was formed a long time ago. Even though they weren't that great, they lost 1,000 more than they won. The St. Louis moniker then became first in beer, first in shoes, last in the American League. There was a loyalty.
Yeah.
Now, there's many people who are listening. We have listeners across the United States and internationally. They may not know about the St. Louis Browns as a baseball team. Yeah. Can you give like a couple minute condensed lesson on that?
The National League was founded in 1876. And the St. Louis, they did have a team in 1876. They were the St. Louis Brown Stockings, but they got kicked out after 2 seasons for gambling and game-fixing issues. And then along came a second National League team called the St. Louis Maroons in 1884. They lasted a couple years but failed financially because there was an American Association team that was playing here, also by the name Brown Stockings, formed by a man named Chris Von der Eye. They were the best team in the American Association, which ran from 1882 to 1891. And they were so good, they won 3 championships. They were invited to join the National League in 1892. So St. Louis has had 3 different National League teams. The American League comes along in 1901. There was no team in St. Louis. St. Louis is the 4th largest town in America. Ban Johnson, who was the president, decided we need to take St. Louis and make it an American League town. The Cardinals, who even though they came over as the Brown Stockings, shortened their name to the Browns from 1892 to 1898, they were a bad team. Their really good streak in the American Association did not follow them. So he thought he could take over the town, something Bill Veck's going to do in 1951. He thinks he's going to run the Cardinals out of town. Ban Johnson moved the Milwaukee Brewers, one of the 8 original American League teams, a name we're familiar with today. He moved them from Milwaukee to St. Louis in 1902, and the Browns played here from 1902 to 1953. They had some really great teams. They had the first ever MVP in baseball in George Sisler in 1922. They had the very first ever American League Rookie of the Year in 1949 in St. Louis and Roy Sievers. Played the Cardinals 80 years ago this season in the World Series in 1944. But then Veck, as I said, thought he could run the Cardinals out because Fred Sy, the owner of the Cardinals at that period in 1951, was headed to jail for tax evasion. And the Cardinal players were aging out. But there was a man just from down the street here on Arsenal thought he could sell a lot of beer if he owned and he kept the Cardinals in town, Augie Bush. Mm-hmm. And by that time, Veck realized he couldn't overtake Bush. Sold him Sportsman's Park. Sportsman's Park was always the Browns' ballpark. And they moved to Baltimore. In 1954 was their first season there. And Baltimore has said the Browns died. They were buried in St. Louis. Their legacy did not come east. And I've been on Baltimore radio numerous times, and people are like, we don't know what you're talking about. They have no heralding of this legacy.
Wow.
And I didn't know that the Browns came from Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, yeah, 1 year. Just the interesting thing is the Baltimore was a part of that original American League inaugural class of 1901, and in 1903 they moved to New York, become the Highlanders, and soon changed their name to Yankees. So the Yankees were not an original. They came from Baltimore. And so Baltimore's kind of got a little chip on the shoulder.
I bet they do.
That whole thing.
I bet they do.
But they actually, from that time they lost and were moved to New York, they became the premier minor league team. They were like had the legendary run like the Yankees in the minor leagues. Had some great ball players. Babe Ruth even played for them.
I'll be darned.
A lot of close ties between those two cities.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I guess I should have known the Browns were here so long. I didn't realize they were here. Yeah, that's a long time.
It is. The farther you get away, it seems like so much farther apart. But there's so many things besides Sisler and his greatness. Roy Sievers, Heine Miney. Everybody listening here, Heine Miney. Their mind just went to that baseball. I played on a Heine Miney was actually a pitcher for the Browns in 1922.
Yes,
really?
Yeah. Is that right?
And he owned a tavern, and he created the ball field right behind it.
Yes, the Heine Miney. Yes,
Yeah, down in Lime.
Yeah, we've played on that many times.
My aunt,
high school.
she had
team.
a house right in center field.
White House up on the hill.
Yeah.
I played. I still play. My dad played. Anybody who's played baseball in St. Louis has probably played
at
Heine Miney. But Heine Miney was a real person. But I mean, we had.
I didn't know that.
Here's a little fun fact.
That is a fun fact. Never knew.
The St. Louis Browns outfield of the 20s. They're the only team in Major League Baseball that the same three men play 5 years and hit over 300 in the outfield. The same outfield. It's never happened since. And they actually hit 330.
Wow.
You had Kenny Williams, Baby Doll Jacobson, and Johnny Tobin. They would have had 6 year, but Johnny Tobin hit 299 that last year.
They actually integrated before the Cardinals did.
7 years before. Jackie Robinson integrated baseball on April 15, 1947. July 5th, Bill Veck brings on Larry Dolby. But it was July 16, 17, 18, 19, the Browns signed Hank Thompson and Willard Brown. And on the 19th, it was the first time they played together. So they were the first team to have two African Americans. There would only be two more before the year would go out. And after 3 seasons, there'd only be 11 African Americans. But it was very special that St. Louis, 7 years before 1954, when Tom Alston took the field for the Cardinals, and amazingly, Boston, the cradle of democracy, 1959, 12 years after Jackie.
Wow.
But the thing of it is, unfortunately, people remember the first and second astronauts to walk on the moon.
Yeah.
They don't remember the third and fourth astronauts to walk on the moon, just like they remember Larry Dolby and Jackie Robinson, but they don't remember the third and fourth African Americans to cross the chalk line.
Yeah, and Boston was the last one.
Boston was the last one, yes.
Yeah. Go figure.
I just helped them with a display a year ago on that because they played Boston the day they both played, and then the next week the Browns went to Boston, and they were the first African Americans to play in the major leagues in Boston. So we did a display. I worked with the Boston Red Sox archivist on that.
Gosh. So you can tell, folks, you're listening to Arnold Strick with Mark Langston of St. Louis and Tune. You can tell that Ed Wheatley is not a lightweight in the historian aspect of being a baseball fanatic. And a fanatic in the sense that he digs, he knows, he's like Mr. St. Louis Browns. I'll say that. And have you found a place to put all the Browns stuff? I know you had a display down at the Eugene Fieldhouse for a while.
Yeah, we had that for a whole baseball season from March through November 1st a year ago. We're still working. We have different sites. We've got pieces where we've loaned, even in the Cardinal Museum, Hall of Fame, which they are very good about helping us. And the DeWitts, because the DeWitts' dad was a longtime general manager, president of the Browns, and he even owned them for several years with his brother in the late 40s. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that's the most famous
Never knew that.
film.
He's the one that brought the little guy
No,
out?
that was Bill Veeck.
Okay, Bill Veeck, okay.
Brought Eddie Goodell, the little 3'7" little person. But today's date in 1948 is a memorable picture of Babe Ruth and little Bill DeWitt Jr., who was a bat boy. Babe Ruth is showing him how to hold a bat, and I always joke with Bill, he's got Google eyes staring up, and this little guy. But it was Babe Ruth, in 1948, this date, his last appearance in a Major League Baseball stadium. And it was here in St. Louis. He had done the famous one you always see where he's standing at home plate in his uniform, holding on to a bat. It's real shaky. It's Bob Feller's bat. Feller ran out and you always see him looking from the back, and you got the facade of Yankee Stadium. The next Saturday, he came to St. Louis as part of an American Legion Ford Motor Company tour. And he came because St. Louis had two really great American Legion teams here in St. Louis. Stockham, which is going to do multiple. Stockham was North St. Louis, Beaumont teams. And he was supportive of that. And Belleville, Illinois had a great American Legion team. And he was committed to that. And he said, I will come. And they had already had it all worked out. And, if in my book, Baseball in St. Louis, I got big chapters about it. You can see all the posters and the pictures of that day, because I always thought that was so special. The last place he came was here in St. Louis, and there's pictures of Yogi Berra because the Yankees were playing the Browns. Yogi was honored. You have Dizzy Dean came out of the broadcast booth, and put on his Browns uniform. And yes, I always say one of my favorite stories is Dizzy actually played for the Browns, and people go, "You're crazy! It's St. Louis Cardinals he played." I said he played one day for the St. Louis Browns. He was a broadcaster of the Browns, and the Browns weren't very good that year. And he would say, we need a new pitcher. This guy can't hit the side of the barn. Let's get my grandma out here. She can pitch better. Players didn't like it. So for one day, Dizzy came out, signed a contract with the Browns, came out and pitched in 1947. And he threw a shutout until he got hurt. His back stiffened up because in typical Dizzy's fashion, he hits a single, but he tries to stretch it into a double and successfully. But when he slid, he jerked his back. Yeah. So it's that's one of those special moments because my dad was on that American Legion team, and that's where he got an autographed baseball. Ruth gave them all. But it's interesting. Bill DeWitt's dad was the owner of the team, and he had this picture of Babe Ruth and Bill DeWitt, and he said to their team photographer, run out and get these developed really quick and get back here as fast as you can because we got to make sure the Babe's healthy because he was not healthy. But for some reason that day he was feeling really good. He's all dressed up. He's got his big navy blue suit, and he's got the white and black shoes. I can't remember what you call them. He's out there, and that's I've been up in Bill's office, and hanging there on the wall is the picture Babe Ruth signed it of him and Bill. And it's just a special memory in the fact that it happened on this date in 1948, and he would soon die in a few more weeks.
Wow, that's wonderful.
But that's the beauty of St. Louis baseball, is all these stories. You could be on air for a whole week and nonstop with stories from St. Louis baseball.
Yeah.
St. Louis baseball recently lost two individuals, Whitey Herzog and Kenny Holtzman.
Yeah.
And you knew Whitey.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about what he was like.
I knew him. There's this Baseball in St. Louis book, just a good example. One day I'm driving and he goes, Eddie, it's Whitey. Mary Lou's mad at me. She wants to go out, and I want to read your book. I can't put it down. And I pulled over. Next 45 minutes, it was just, Yeah. He was just with the research. I remember all this. The whole stories. Whitey, you just would go, Wow. Well, he would just go. I mean, if you were in the locker room, like let's say most recently in the past, the fantasy camps, I'd get there real early because I knew when he'd eat, and I'd sit with him and Lou Brock, and we just go story. I mean, he was as sharp as can be. You get him on the telephone or whatever, and he had stories about this or that or how this should be, and it's different today and probably shouldn't be that way. I mean, he believed in what he evolved. Whitey ball. Why aren't they stealing? Why aren't they running on these guys? Why do they want to hit it out? You got to touch first before you can touch home. So you got to get on base. And not all the balls go out of the ballpark. But he had that philosophy. And some of that really all comes back to some of these great managers that were created as bench players, whether you're listening to Casey Stengel or any of these others, they learn the game and they execute the game. Whereas for guys like Ruth, who wanted to be a manager, or my most favorite is Rogers Hornsby, was a manager for the Browns in the 30s. But before that, he was the manager of the Cardinals in 26 when they won their first World Series championship. And they fired him and traded him off immediately because he couldn't get along with the players or the owners. And then they traded him to New York for Frankie Frisch. The Giants got rid of him after a year. The Boston Braves got rid of him after a year. Eventually he goes to Chicago, and he lasts a year and a half. And Bill Veeck's dad fires him. And the players do win the pennant that year for the first time in a long time. They vote him 0 share. They could not stand because he just thought everybody should be as good as him. He could not understand why you couldn't hit 400 every year.
Yeah, he was the last one to hit 400, wasn't he?
In the National League. Yeah. Williams did it.
Okay, in the American
League in 41. And he just couldn't get along. He couldn't even get along with the owner. And when the Cardinals owner came into one of these meetings, he told him to get out of here. This is my clubhouse. And he reminded him whose clubhouse it was when he traded him as soon as the season was over. But here you win the town's first World Series, and you're immediately out.
We're going to take a break in a couple of minutes here. And Ed, when we come back, tell us about the first time you met Whitey Herzog, okay, when we come back. And then we're going to get into talking about Kenny Holtzman, a University City graduate who went to the University of Illinois and got drafted by the Chicago Cubs, ended up at the Oakland A's and some other multiple teams. I think he was on the Yankees and came back to the Cubs to finish his career. So we'll talk more about that. This is Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston of St. Louis in Tune. Don't go away. This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page. On behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, this has been Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune.
At St. Louis in Tune, we strive to bring you informative, useful, and reflective stories, as well as interviews about current and historic issues and events that involve people, places, and things. We cover a wide range of topics, such as the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, health, history, housing, humor, justice, and sports, and that's just to name a few. While St. Louis in Tune originates from the Gateway City and covers local topics, we also connect to what's going on nationally as well. If you missed any of our previously aired programs of St. Louis in Tune, simply visit stlintune.com. That's stlintune.com. There you'll find the show notes and everything that was mentioned in that episode and all the other great episodes as well. And if you've got an area that you'd like us to examine deeper, well, just let us know by dropping us a note at stlintune@gmail.com. That's stlintune@gmail.com. St. Louis in Tune. It's heard Monday through Friday on the USRadioNetwork.com and many great radio stations around the U.S. and, of course, right here in St. Louis. Our website again is stlintune.com. Visit us today. That's stlintune.com.
And there's the pitch. I can't do that like Jack Buck or Harry Carey or anybody like that. So, hey, St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston. We're talking to Ed Wheatley. He's in studio to talk about Whitey Herzog, Kenny Holtzman. We just got done with a great discussion about the St. Louis Browns. And if you want more information on the St. Louis Browns, go to stlbrowns.com. stlbrowns.com. They're holding their big celebration, their annual reunion luncheon, and that's going to be in September.
September 24th. The week in August, we've got Browns Night at the Grizzlies. We're honoring Ned Garver, 1951 season. He won 20 games on a team that lost 100. So the 154 games they played. If you wanted to go to a game,
carrying the team,
you want to watch a baseball game that year. You found out was Garver pitching or not.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was the thing. Even people say the Browns didn't always do as good, but you got to see Babe Ruth, Ted Williams,
right?
All these men from the American League. That's what really makes St. Louis. We were one of the few cities that have two teams. You got to see everybody.
Right. Can I ask, I don't know anybody that really knew Whitey Herzog very well, but I just recently...
I think he's one of the most gregarious guys you ever meet.
Oh, I'm a big fan of him.
Yeah.
Whitey Ball was a big, go out and just throw one pitch. I just, anything to win. But I just recently saw a clip of him going to the mound, and he was mic'd up. And I was like, what is he going to say to this pitcher who's just tanking? It was the most positive thing I have ever heard. It's, come on now, I know you can do this. You're a much better pitcher than this, and you've got it in you now. Let's just throw those strikes. It was amazing how positive, uplifting. It wasn't like, what is wrong with you? It wasn't anything like that. It was more like, come on, you can do that. It was I was just fascinated to hear.
It's funny you say that because I was just flying back from London the other night, and I was going through on the internet, going through some things, and there was a mic'd up Tommy Lasorda coming out to the mound against, and Ra was the pitcher, and he just teared him.
Yeah,
it was beep 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 if I was telling you what he said on this show, but it was really just what you said, tearing down. Whitey was a player's manager. He knew what it liked because I think the thing is so many. We talked about Hornsby being so great earlier in this clip, and he couldn't equate with the players and their struggles. Whitey was a journeyman ball player. He said he got good in baseball when he quit playing.
Yeah,
and that's the truth. He was just a journeyman player, but he did play those seasons, and so he understood what it's like in those situations. And it's not easy. There are a few players, like when Albert Pujols, those first 11 years, looked pretty easy.
Right.
But for most, it's not. And I think that was one of the things that really players believed in. You got to remember when Willie McGee, he came, he was like this lost child, it seemed. The Yankees had given up on him. You look at Ozzie, and Ozzie was all glove, no bat.
Mm-hmm.
He believed in him. The thing about, hey, you owe me $1. If you hit it in the air, I'll pay you $1. You hit it into the ground and run. He did things like that to make them believe in themselves, and that made the team. It big bonds as a team when everybody rallies around the manager. There's no hard feelings.
So what was tell us about the first time you met Whitey Herzog.
When you said that going into the break, I'm thinking, how long ago was that? And what was the shtick? I think it was probably at one of the – first time I probably met him was at one of the baseball writer dinners, and it was him and George Brett kind of go into town.
2 peas in a pod.
2 peas in a pod. I saw George at Whitey's Celebration of Life a couple weeks ago, and he is bigger than life. He is very verbose, but it wasn't ever a negative verboseness. It was a feel-good.
Yeah. Because
usually when Whitey would be something, there's always going to be a few laughs to it and a kind of a qualified pop story. Stan Musial was the same way. That of Stan's laugh when he told the story, always in the middle. But, yeah, Whitey, he understood the game. He understood how hard it is. He understood what it would take to not only play it but to win. And I did a child's book called Incredible Cardinals several years ago. I still teach that. School districts have me come, and I do about 5,000 kids a school year on how to write well and I didn't really want to write that book because there's a lot of Cardinal books here, there, and everywhere. And I said, there is one thing for a child's book. I thought, it's the men on the left field wall. Who are these people? Because they are the foundation of baseball.
Right.
These are the incredible Cardinals. And when it came to do the page, and I took some original photos like Lou Brock running, and then we made it for kids by flames coming out like a dragster when they're real fast.
Yeah.
He's got to have flame. He's got some bases. He's stolen bases. He's got the wings of Hermes on his helmet because pictures tell 1,000 words in this relationship. So you talk about that with kids, but you can see the pictures and you immediately know a lot about them before you even see the verse because a little anecdote and it rhymes. So we talk about how we put this all together. So when it came to Whitey, and these pictures are just beautifully colored, we get all kinds of recognition awards for this book. What do I do for Whitey? And you always saw him standing on the steps just staring at the field, sometimes his hand on his chin. And the thing that came to my mind for him was the wheels were always turning at his head. And so we played around with this illustrator of a computer, and I wanted the wheels were always turning and coming out. The old computer wanted to come out of the string. The wheels were always turning on how to win the game that night. Because Whitey, when he was managing, he was 3 or 4 innings ahead.
Right.
It wasn't you're caught up in the moment like, what do we do?
Right.
Whitey knew it. If this guy's coming in, this guy's going to come up and pinch hit. Or if this guy's bad, I'm bringing this pitcher in. He was so far. He was just so enjoyable to talk baseball because not only did he know the game, he knew the nuances, and he just had a story about everything and everybody. One of the best when him and Don Larson played for the Browns. He always came to our dinners and luncheons, but they played together in Kansas City, and just be with those two at a table and maybe a Budweiser or something. But unbelievable stories. It's just amazing. But it was the intellect and just nothing, no better than anybody, but even though he was the best.
The baseball IQ.
Yeah, and I put in this Baseball in St. Louis book, the all St. Louis team. These are the men who made it to the major leagues, all from St. Louis, and who were the best. And I put 2 at every position, and 3 left-handed, 3 right-handed, and then 4 men in the bullpen so I could get a complete team. It's tough. There's so many great men. Likewise, there's so many great managers who came from St. Louis. You had Whitey, of course. You had Yogi Berra. He coached there with the managed with the Yankees and the Mets. Yep. You had Shandy's, of course. He was just across the river. Right. You had Earl Weaver from St. Louis, Beaumont High with the Orioles. You had Dick Williams, also from Beaumont with his greatness at the A's. He was in the A's or the Red Sox. You Hank Bauer from across the river. He won the Orioles' first World's Championship. I went through who would be the best, and I put Whitey as the top over all those names just simply because he was the perfect manager. He was a perfect man, and he made his team that you would think, what is this team on paper? He made a World Series champions and National League pennant winners. Should have probably had another World Series championship if
Don
Mr. Deckinger. That's a great Whitey Herzog story. Whitey, have you ever not had a word to say? Because you always got a word that's going to last 10, 20 minutes. He said, I ran out there, and I was ready to get in Deckinger's face and give it to him. And he said, Whitey, you're right, I blew it. And he said, I didn't know what to say. He just stopped me in my tracks. Because, there was no replay and stuff in those days. What could you do? Right. And he just said, Whitey, I blew it. And that was Whitey's one moment that he didn't have anything to say. Wow. It's just, there's so many fun stories.
That's interesting.
That is a fun story.
Kenny Holtzman.
Kenny.
Somebody that maybe St. Louisans don't know a whole lot about unless he had pitched when he was at the Cubs and they came into town. But what do you know about Kenny Holtzman?
I've got to know him a little bit. Kenny was a recluse in his later days, but I would get him to come to the Browns luncheons. People don't realize Kenny Holtzman won more games than Sandy Koufax as a left-handed pitcher. Came out of University City High School in St. Louis, through to no-hitters, multiple All-Star games, multiple World Series with the A's, and then the Yankees would win a pennant with him. He was probably a dominating pitcher of the early to mid-'70s, and he had a long career, over 200 wins. But it's the irony, he won more games than Sandy Koufax. That tells you something about his resume. And again, as we mentioned, U-City, you have a tie to Kenny through U-City. Ed Mickelson, one of our 3 surviving Farmer Browns, was a coach there at U-City with him, and he had a close relationship. And that's where one of the times I got Kenny to come to our luncheons was because I wanted to honor Ed Mickelson, who played for the Browns. He also did play briefly with the Cardinals as well.
Okay.
But there was always a guy by the name of Musil at his position at first base during those years that he couldn't.
Darn.
Yeah. Hey, I got called up. Basically, that is Ed Mickelson. I got called up. Then I was told the one day I get there, what's the signs? What do you need signs for? Well, if I get on base, that means you're playing, right? Do you know who's playing in first base for us? Musil. Okay. Then he follows that up with the story. There was one game I came to the stadium, and here's the lineup. Your name's on it. I said, what? Where's Musil? He's got 103 fever. He's back at the hotel. Oh. Was it really 103 fever? Or was it they were playing the Boston Braves and Warren Spahn was pitching that day? And Ed did get a hit off Warren Spahn.
Wow.
There were 3 hits in the game. But
he was a fireballer.
Oh, yeah. Very much great
He and Bob
pitcher.
Feller.
Both of them. That's correct. And I never did see Feller pitch, but I keep score every game I go to, and I'll go through all the scorecards over the years and highlight I saw this or that or this pitcher. And I remember Warren Spahn as a kid watching him, knowing that he was one of the greatest decades even before but that high kick he had,
right.
and as a lefty.
Like Juan Marichal.
The left-handed version of Juan Marichal. You're right. Yeah, and it was funny how all these very effective pitchers of those days gone by had those kind of motions and deliveries, and now everything seems to be, it's got to be this way. And
they even pitched complete games, Mark.
Yeah. I know. Isn't that some pitchers used to go a whole game? Or
yeah, they probably
pretty
go
darn
150
close.
pitches.
Yeah. I mean, it was nothing, and then they would go. If you really want to go back in time, if you look at prior, and I usually use about 1974 as a gauge, box scores don't have that many pitching. That has so much to do with the length of games because they weren't making pitching changes all the time. But pitchers would actually, in their time between starts, they would relieve. You didn't have that specialty relief corps. They would come in and get their mid-rotation throws by relieving. And so it was not uncommon for...
Seemed to work out okay then.
Yeah.
I don't know why they...
Pitchers picked up saves. They picked up extra wins to their totals. Even when Dizzy, the last player in the National League to win 30 games, Dizzy Dean, some of them were in saves. Save situations that they weren't saves. He won the game.
Right.
But,
That's crazy.
It is.
I always loved going to a game when Bob Gibson was pitching because you knew the game was going to go fast.
Very fast.
All of the players were always on their toes because, man, he didn't mess around.
that's one of the big things of today. They're putting themselves deeper into the count with belief that you don't swing at the first pitch and you got to see it. And next thing, it's 2-2, 3-2. They following off several in there in between. It's a number of pitches per game is up.
When we went to the game the other day, and I was talking to my wife about this, that it seems like watching a game when I was a kid and watching a game now, and I remember Bob Gibson saying this, and I'd like your comment on this, Ed, is that he was like, hey, listen, you're not the only player out there. There's 8 other players out on the field. Pitch the ball and let them get involved with the game.
There you go.
And it seems like a lot of these pitchers now, they want to control the game and control everything that happens at the plate. So they're really, in my words, it just becomes this head case and this head game for them rather than just pitch the ball, let the hitter hit it, and let the rest of the fielders field.
I'll tell you a really good story. That's got a St. Louis connection. Jerry Royce, who's a good friend of mine, pitched for the Cardinals and got traded because he wouldn't shave his mustache off. 220 wins in the big leagues. Traded by the same owner who traded
Steve Carlton
because Carlton wanted 5,000 more. Carlton had over 300. Royce and Carlton would have been on the same team throughout the 70s. They win 500 games together. 3 seasons, the Cardinals just needed 3 more wins, and they would have been in first place in the early 70s. But when Jerry got to L.A., another great left-handed pitcher came up to him and said, "Kid, why are you trying to strike everybody out? You got these guys behind you. You're going to let them hit it, let them catch it. You're going to throw less pitches, and you're going to have a much longer career."
Yeah,
and that's why I think you see so many of these pitchers not always injured or having because they're throwing so many pitches in the they're throwing in the bullpen every day to come in every day. That very intelligent pitcher just happened to be Sandy Koufax. So Koufax is the guy who changed Jerry Royce. One of my favorite Gibson stories, if you got time for this one, this 1968 World Series, Game 1. Remember? And I love this. And I got the true story from Al Kaline one time while we were playing golf. And Gibson's out there. He's striking everybody out. It's top of the 9th. Strikes out the first guy. On the ticker board. You remember the old original Busch Stadium? It was just like a ticker board.
Yeah.
Bob Gibson has just tied Sandy Koufax for most strikeouts in a World Series game at 15. And I tell this story to all these kids and when I'm at the schools talking about my book, Bob Gibson's page in the book. And all of a sudden the crowd sees it and they jump up, and a standing ovation and all that. And Gibson looks over his left shoulder and just shakes his head. McCarver comes out thinking, I need to calm him down or whatever. And Gibson, get in some flavorful language, get behind the plate. And I asked Kaline, what was that like, that moment? Because Kaline was the next batter, and then Willie Horton is the following batter.
Wow.
He said, I looked at that. I looked at Gibson. I turned to Willie Horton. I said, we're toast.
Yeah.
He didn't use the word toast, but for this airing I will. We're toast. Because he knew what was going to happen. Gibson struck them both out. Yeah. The record is now 17. Wow. But it was that it pumped him up. I remember stories of Kenny Boyer coming out to the mound in the 64 World Series to Gibson, and he said, what are you doing here? Do you ever see me walk over to third base? Get off my
Oh, my.
I love that. I love that.
So it's just baseball stories. Like I said, Kenny Holtzman, I remember him, that great A's team, Oakland A's, and they're 3
A lot of great
wins.
pitchers on that team.
Oh,
Vida Blue and
Blue Moon Odom, Mudcat Grant.
Catfish Hunter, was he on that team?
Yeah, Catfish was their leader. And then you had Fingers in the bullpen.
My gosh. No wonder they won.
And then you had some great hitters. Everybody, Reggie Jackson, he was a straw that stirred it. But you had Sal Bando and Gene Tennis, Joe Rudy.
Right.
Dave Duncan was catcher for part of that time.
Wow.
Okay.
How about that?
And Dick Green, who the one year was MVP, he was just an outstanding defensive player, second baseman. So they had a dynasty there, and it was. And by the way, they also had a guy named Dal Maxwell. So Dal got a couple extra rings beyond his Cardinal rings out there, and that's one of the things people forget is how many rings Dal Maxwell. We always think Dal Maxwell.
How many did he have?
He got 2 out there, and he got the 1 World Series ring here with the Cardinals, and he got then his 2 National League rings here.
Almost one for every finger.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
He became a GM, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He became the Cardinals GM for a long time.
Okay.
And just say he had to deal with, after the passing of the Big Eagle, Augie Jr., with Augie III, who did not really want to put money into baseball. It's a kid's game. Brewery is more. You don't make more money than the people who run the brewery. But he did help orchestrate putting together some great teams. But that's the one thing when I was putting together, I said, I need my shortstop, Dal. It's definitely you. But that's the one area where St. Louis didn't have a really standout second shortstop player. And we wound up taking across, I said, put your general manager hat on, to your point. And we wound up with Jerry Buchek, who was kind of a key backup. Right. And we also had his catchers. I said I would only put 2. Of course, Yogi Berra, one of the greatest catchers of all time, here from St. Louis on the Hill.
Loved it, yeah.
And then
Joe
Garagiola.
No.
Joe was just really a journeyman catcher. His antics were made bigger by the Today Show and the Game of the Week. But Elston Howard.
Oh.
Elston Howard, to me, is the greatest African-American ball player to come on.
Really?
From St. Louis,
wow.
Elston Howard, he only played in 10 World Series and 12 or 13, I can't remember, it's one of those numbers, All-Star games. And he was the MVP in 1963. in an American League MVP. And that's forgotten because people try to tell me, oh, you're wrong. You need to have Joe Gershie.
Interesting.
But yeah,
Did you ever have a chance to meet Willie Mays?
I did not ever get up around him and shake him. I've seen him on a couple scenarios. I did see him play.
I did too.
And that's a sad exercise.
I'm
you start
jealous.
going through your mind after you hear another one pass away, Mays. And,
Right.
I've seen Kenny Holtzman play multiple times, of course, Whitey. But when I start thinking about all these men, I was fortunate enough to see Stan play. I was at his last game. Some other games prior to that as a young kid. And you start saying, I have seen Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford, and I saw Yogi Berra, and you start thinking about Hank Aaron. We've seen him, and he's passed. Willie Stargell, Roberto Clemente, and then you talk about Willie.
Talk about Drysdale, Koufax.
Oh, Drysdale, Koufax. I can remember a couple of those seasons, especially '63 when Cardinals were trying to win it for Stan, and it came down to the key series in early September with the Dodgers, and they threw Drysdale and Koufax.
Yeah.
And, oh, man. And Dodgers would go on and win it all, beat the Yankees in '63 for the World Series champ. But there were some. You mentioned Juan Marichal earlier. There were some great players.
Willie McCovey.
From baseball's golden years, if you will, that they're all fading away. And that's why it's important to have talks like this to bring up these names in people's memory. Brooks Robinson.
Absolutely.
Just one of the nicest guys I've ever met. And spent several days with him playing golf. And when you go around and it's just, they're all fading.
Yeah, Ernie Banks.
Oh, there's one.
Chicago.
Right. And you can pretty much go from team to team. Harmon Killebrew, Gaylord Perry, all these guys, I'll call the golden age of baseball. I'm not saying this is worse. It was just a different game and was played differently. And it's interesting always asking them what do they think of today's game.
Good question. I was going to ask you, what did you think about today's game?
It's not the same game as would be told. But I also...
And the players, is it different?
It's so much different.
I don't see these kind of players coming up.
Well, I think you got two or three things that play. One, so many of them change teams. So there is not this long tenure. What would Albert's tenure of memories have been had he not come back for that one season?
Right, that's true.
Because, those 10 years or 9 years he was away, maybe his value stopped. I mean, you can't say his value dropped as a player. His on-the-field success dropped after he left St. Louis. He's still one of the best ever, despite that. But, so you don't have that continuity of Stan was always there. You always counted on him being there. Now it's you're here and gone, you're here and gone. That's one thing. And second thing, it's about the money. You don't want to get hurt, you lose the money. Two, the agents. They qualify, can only pitch so many innings. This is all part of what you agree on in the contracts. I remember Enos Slaughter talking about that. If we didn't feel good, we never told anybody because we didn't want somebody to come in and lose our job.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not there anymore.
And you talk about the money. One of my favorite stories is to tell people was baseball ends in October, whether you make the World Series or not. And most of these guys weren't making much more money. Where I grew up, we had 5 Cardinals in our neighborhood. Shannon was one of them. They didn't make a lot of money playing in those days, so they would get extra jobs. Some of them would work at car dealerships. If they were a bigger name, that would draw people to come into the car dealership. And I talk to a repeat world when you see all these FedEx and Prime and UPS trucks driving through your neighborhood. Right. Well, in those days, a lot of the Cardinals, perfect fit. So starting late October through Christmas, Famous Bar, Sticks, Bear, and Fuller, Scruggs, Vanderbilt, they would hire delivery men because people would just say, have it delivered or call up, deliver it. Can you imagine your doorbell rings, you go open it, and there's Enos Slaughter holding a package for you. And
that's crazy.
That's where it really meant baseball was everything. It wasn't necessarily the money because these guys really didn't make the money. But to have Hall of Famer Enos Slaughter be your delivery man.
That's crazy.
That is unbelievable. Wow. Good old days, I'm afraid.
We want to have you back because we want you to talk about the 80th anniversary of the 1944 World Series, the Meet Me in St. Louis series, or St. Louis series, between the Cardinals and the Browns. That will be, wasn't that called the Streetcar series?
It's called the Streetcar series because all the games were played at Sportsman's Park. And it really was, they the war was going on, and there was restrictions, so tickets could not be sold outside of 100 miles from St. Louis because of the gas and rationing, and you didn't want to use up the transportation.
Didn't know that.
But, yeah, it was also 1944, Judy Garland's movie, Meet Me in St. Louis, was #1 song, Meet Me in St. Louis, Meet Me at the Fair, but no, for baseball people, it was Meet Me in St. Louis, Meet Me at Sportsman's Park. It is the pinnacle moment of St. Louis baseball history when both your teams play to be world champions.
And folks, you're going to have to listen to that episode when we record it.
Yeah.
And when we broadcast that one. That's going to be a good one.
And you know what's funny is that Meet Me in St. Louis didn't win the Academy Award from that film season.
What?
Going My Way did.
No.
With Bing Crosby. And you know what he wears throughout that?
He's dressed like a priest.
He was a priest, but he wore a Browns jacket, a Browns T-shirt, and a Browns hat.
No
one knew that this was going to happen. This was all filmed before the Browns took off. And we just had a big thing down in Cape Girardeau at Southeast Missouri State University because during the wartime restrictions, you could not travel more than 100 miles to have your spring training. So you had to stay within the little sphere. And you could not go south of, call it the Mason-Dixon line, running up the Ohio River to the East Coast. Because they didn't want pictures of lavish players out in the Florida swimsuits with bathing beauties when guys are getting shot and killed in both war theaters. So they trained in Cape Girardeau, and they happened to have this big equestrian center and dirt, and they really honed their skills, and they got off to a fantastic start down there. And it's a long story we'll talk about when we come back.
Never knew that.
Wow. So that means your people from Cape Girardeau should be listening that day.
Absolutely.
That's all
Absolutely.
News. Yeah, that's new to me.
Ed, thanks for coming in and talking.
I appreciate it all the time. You guys are great. You add great stories to whatever we're talking about.
Well, hey, you're St. Louis and Tunes historian on baseball, and we really appreciate that, sir.
I appreciate it.
The guy. Yeah.
Mark, do you have any days of the day, or should we just call it a day?
I think we should call it a day. I am not even ready for that. Yeah, this has been just so fascinating. I'm so glad that.
And I really appreciate the detail that you put into everything that you've done, because it's not only enjoyable to listen to, it's informative, it's accurate, and it's our history.
Well, it is.
I really appreciate that.
You don't want to forget, as I said, you go up to Brooklyn, New York, the Giants and Dodgers, there's no one there rallying, no one showing up for events because it doesn't exist. And you would think of all places that's where there would be. But here in St. Louis, America's best baseball town.
I know. I'm getting worried, though. We have 11 World Series that we've won, and they're starting to knock on the door a little bit with us. I know. We need to get a little bit.
It's going to be the next couple of weeks going to be interesting. Are they a buyer or a seller?
I hear they're not selling.
And what I was going to say is, even though if you're bouncing around 500, you're still right there in the chase on the wild card. And they've got the team. They've had some injuries.
Right.
What is that click, that Whitey Herzog type, getting the team to rally? Or maybe it was in 1964 when they were so far behind and they had the closed session and Johnny Keane throws a chair and there was disruption and they won it all.
That's what has to happen. Explosion in the locker room.
It got to. All right.
Thanks, folks, for listening. That's all. And if you've enjoyed this episode, you can listen to additional shows at stlntune.com. Consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue to grow. And we want to thank Bob Berthasell for our theme music. We want to thank our guests, Ed Wheatley and co-host Mark Langston. We thank you for being a part of our community of curious minds. St. Louis in Tune is a production of Motif Media Group and the U.S. Radio Network. Remember to keep seeking, keep learning, walk worthy, and let your light shine. For St. Louis in Tune, I'm Arnold Stricker.